Meks. I use they, them pronouns. And as you said, I'm from GridPoint, coming to you from the United States. So when you spin up a new Phoenix project with LiveView, we get lots of tools right out of the box, including Tailwind CSS. And today I'll be sharing a story with you all that will introduce folks to Tailwind, demonstrate how Tailwind and Phoenix LiveView can work really well together, and show off how you can customize Tailwind for an improved user experience. This presentation comes with a GitHub repo and a live demo. The demo has 5 routes that correspond to the 5 phases of a web app that increases in complexity and adds more features using Tailwind and LiveView. So let's get started. This is Marcy. She is a back-end Elixir engineer, and she collects books the same way a dragon hoards treasure. She has a lot of them. And this is the tale of how she harnesses the power of Phoenix LiveView and Tailwind CSS to present her beloved book collection to the world, or at least the internet. She has a TOML file with all of her books, and being very comfortable with Elixir, she decides to try Phoenix, the popular framework that all of her front-end buddies just keep raving about. She has done some front-end work in the past, so she is familiar with building web apps and using CSS, but those memories are covered in cobwebs. She is both ambitious and lazy, and her goal is to have a nice way to show off her book collection with the minimum amount of effort required. So she spins up a new project called Bookshelf and takes a look at what all is generated by the mix command. She makes a mental note of an interesting file called core components, which has functions like icon, button, modal, and she thinks to herself, it'll be good to either implement these or refer to them when I'm writing my own, because I trust the creators of Phoenix to write clean code. She notices that many of the HTML elements have a bunch of classes on them, like this button. Look at this class soup. What in the world does a CSS file look like? So she navigates to the assets folder and opens up app.css to find this. 3 imports? That's it? What the heck is Tailwind? Perplexed, Marcy goes to her trusted search engine and finds the official Tailwind documentation. Tailwind is a utility-first framework that can be composed to create designs directly in your markup. Well, that doesn't actually help Marcy all that much. The last time she wrote CSS, she thought of classes as representing different elements of the UI. Their primary purpose was to describe all the styles of a particular element in a single place. She does some research into utility-first CSS and learns that in this approach, classes do not define different components, but rather they provide us with a toolbox of different helper classes, and you can mix those together to style a component and apply them directly to the HTML element. So instead of this, we get this. Huh, thinks Marcy. This is very different from how I've worked in the past. But this Tailwind thing already comes with the Phoenix framework, so I might as well learn how to use it. She proceeds to make a page where she can add a table to display her list of books. Using her TOML file, she constructs an API to transform them into a nice list of Elixir structs. Once she has a route and a controller with a corresponding HTML file, she then goes ahead to add an h1 tag and a simple table. She wants to display all of her books with the info that she has coalesced, things like their title, the author, her personal opinion of it, etc. She starts up the server to go and see how this is looking. She's used to seeing some default browser styles applied, so she's surprised at the appearance of the h1 element. But Tailwind is rather opinionated, and it strips many of those defaults out, so we have a blank canvas to work with. She dives right into the Tailwind documentation and finds the system pretty intuitive. Utilities follow patterns that describe their CSS property. So you get things like M for margin, and for properties that have directionality, L for left. She also appreciates the simplicity of the scale. If you think in pixels, you multiply the utility by 4. So something of H8 means it'll have a height of 32 pixels. If you prefer to think in rems, you'll divide the utility by 4. So a width of 20 would be 5 rems wide. And this scale is applied to margin, padding, height, and width. So once Marcy has learned one of them, she's able to use it across various utilities. From there, she quickly finds out how to adjust the text size, the font weight, the text color, and how to add some borders with spacing to add some dimension to her table. Soon, she starts to notice a pattern that she detests. She wants the same styling for each header of the table, and to do that, she had to repeat the same set of classes no fewer than 6 times. That's a lot of repeated code, and it'll be obnoxious if she wants to change any of those styles in the future. Phoenix provides us with the ability to define reusable function components with Heeks templates. A function component is a function that receives and assigns map as an argument, and it returns some dynamic markup built with the H sigil. And Elixir code can be written within it using interpolation, and she'll use the at text to access the key that's defined inside the assigns. Now she can change her headers to use the function component. That's much cleaner, it's a lot easier to read, and if she wants to make future changes, she only has to do it in one place. In fact, the Tailwind documentation suggests this kind of componentization as a best practice. For this function component, she passes in the text to be rendered as an adder since each header will be styled in the same way. And she can specify the text attribute with the adder macro to declare which adder the function should expect to receive when invoked. And by requiring it, she'll get a nice helpful error if she ever forgets to actually pass in that adder when using that function. Marcy also wants to write function components for her data cells, but she needs a way to style the cells differently based on the content, because her review fields, sometimes she has a lot of text and they already have line breaks in them, and she wants to maintain that style. So instead of an adder, it makes more sense to pass the data to the function component as a slot, and slots will accept blocks of customizable Heeks. She uses the provided slot2 macro to declare a slot for a new function component and uses the render slot expression to render the Heeks content. And for the review column, Marcy writes her third function component with a value adder that she can iterate over for each section of the text of the review. She uses pattern matching on the function head to render an empty Heeks template if there is no text to show. Otherwise, she constructs a simple p tag with a little bit of bottom margin and lines the text to the left using Tailwind utility classes. Because of slots, she is able to pass the review function component as the inner block for the review cell and get the exact styling applied. So she has function components within function components. She notices, though, that because she added bottom margin to make the review easier to read, it is no longer centered in the cell because the last paragraph has extra margin compared to the top. Is there a way that she could conditionally apply the bottom margin? In CSS, she would reach for something like the last selector, but she wants to go all in on this utility framework. Fortunately, Tailwind already has that. Every utility class in Tailwind can be applied conditionally by adding a modifier to the beginning of the class name that describes the condition you want to target. The last modifier will apply styling when it's the last child. And so here, by applying last MB0, she removes the margin from the last child and makes her review centered and pixel perfect. As a final touch, she wants to be able to filter her very extensive list by title and author to make finding books easier. So she goes with an approach that she's familiar with, an HTTP request, post request with a query to filter which books to display. Styling is pretty easy now that she's getting the hang of the Tailwind utility classes. And having written a bit using Tailwind and Phoenix LiveView, Marcy's feeling pretty excited about this framework. She isn't inventing class names, which is an energy drain for her. And in the past, her CSS files would get bigger every time she wanted to add a new feature, making it hard to maintain. And with utilities, everything is reusable and very composable. She's also feeling confident about making changes in the future since all of her classes are local in the HTML, so she doesn't have to worry about something else breaking. Looking at her handiwork, Marcy is pretty proud of herself and can't wait to show it to Nimone. Nimone is the best designer that Marcy knows, and they've been friends a long time. This is Nimone, and they are unimpressed. You know, the type of friend that's supportive, but often very critical. Your color scheme is so boring, and the fonts could be much better. Here, I drew this mock-up for you. Try applying this styling to it. Oh no, custom colors, new fonts, who knows what else Nimone has cooked up in this design. So first things, Nimone has helpfully provided a swatch with hex values for all the colors that they're going to use in their designs. In the Tailwind config.js file, Marcy can either overwrite the existing Tailwind colors, or she can add additional ones. She decides to extend it in this case, in case some of the defaults come in handy. New colors are added in the theme extend colors section. And she decides to make a colors JSON file since she's adding a lot of them and she doesn't want to bloat her config. Her palette includes multiple shades of the same color, and so she groups them together using the nested color object syntax. The nested keys are combined with the parent key to form class names, like for background, BG ooze 400. Now she can use these as regular Tailwind utilities for text and background colors. The next step to tackle are the custom fonts that Nimone used. Inspecting the design, Marcy finds 3 fonts that can be acquired from the Google Font API. Once she has the URL to import, she uses the import rules in CSS so that those fonts are loaded by the browser for her app. By default, Tailwind provides 3 font family utilities, 2 of which are a sans serif stack and a serif stack. Since Marcy wants to use her own custom sans and serif fonts, she decides to overwrite these by editing the theme font family section for her Tailwind config. And because she overwrote the default font, this one is going to be inherited by the HTML, so she doesn't even need to specify the font in the component. The correct font sans styling is already being applied to the table row headers. And then to update the style for the table cells, she can use font serif, and it will apply her new custom serif font. For the header, this is using a Kelnia font, and Marcy notes that it's only used in this H1 element. She has an unofficial rule of 3. If a value or a function isn't being used 3 times, she doesn't like to extract it. So she goes to the documentation to find out if she can implement a Oneoff custom style. And indeed, she can. She uses Tailwind's square bracket notation to generate a class on the fly with any arbitrary value. And she can also use that for the text size, and with this, she's completed styling her H1 tag. Now she's ready to start styling the rest of the table. The background color of the cell rows alternate, so she can use the odd modifier to conditionally change the color. And to add padding to the children elements like the table cells, Marcy wants to use a nested selector like she has in the past. Tailwind provides us with arbitrary variants, which let you write custom selector modifiers directly in your HTML, again using the square bracket notation. For Marcy, this arbitrary modifier adds padding to an element when it is the child of the TR element and a TD element itself. You might wonder if you could replace all repetitive classes in child elements with this method. Marcy's example is fairly simple and straightforward and works well in this scenario. But for anything more complicated, you're often better off writing a new component and applying the styling to the children themselves. So now that the table is looking spiffy and matching Nimone's design, Marcy is ready to update the search styling. This input has a nifty little magnifier icon. And Nimone very helpfully chose a hero icon, which are icons that are actually developed by Tailwind. From their website, Marcy could copy and paste the code for the SVG right where she needs it in her HTML. However, hero icon SVGs are already included in the Phoenix ecosystem. And there's a ready-made icon function in core components. So with this, Marcy is able to customize the size and colors of the icon by setting the width, height, and background color classes. Then, with some absolute positioning and a few added utilities to the button, Marcy has successfully implemented Nimon's design. She nods to herself and thinks, yeah, that was worth the effort. This looks much sharper than my original go at it. Let's go show Nimon. Nice job, Marcy. I knew you could do it. But I have another suggestion for you. Live filtering would be a really nice addition. You don't even need a search button in that case. Nimon, you know I don't like writing JavaScript. It's been ages since I've used it. Maybe the Phoenix framework can help you out. I bet you can figure it out in a couple of hours. That piques Marcy's competitive streak. Knowing absolutely nothing about what she's getting herself into, she blurts out, I bet I can get it done in less than an hour. Nimon smirks and turns over their hourglass. So Marcy rushes to her computer and quickly reads through the Phoenix LiveView documentation and a few helpful blog and forum posts. She realizes she needs to update her controller to instead use LiveView and uses mount to assign the list of books to her WebSocket. And then she switches from using an HTML file to using the render function. And she changes the input to remove the HTTP post request and instead wraps it in a form tag. Adding a phx change form binding will send params from the browser back to the server, and this can be received via a handle event 3 callback. The text value that is typed into the form is sent in a params map, which is nested under search and query, which has been specified by the name input. And from there, she can take the value of the query and pass it to the same function she was using previously to actually limit the display book list and update the socket assigns. Then, with a little bit of tweaking to existing Tailwind classes, Marcy is able to match Nimon's design. Sweating and shaking slightly from the adrenaline of accomplishing her task, she looks over at Nimon's hourglass. Ha! Less than 30 minutes. Nimon peers at the gleeful Marcy. I knew you could do it. I bet you're ready for my next challenge. Marcy sighs in exasperation. At what point did this become a diabolical challenge to test my skills? I will admit, though, this live filtering is much nicer user experience, and I didn't have to write any JavaScript myself. Phoenix and LiveView are really growing on me. She studies the new design that Nimon just sent her. So you combined status and date read into one badge with a check icon. I like it. Looks elegant. But what's with the review text? The table is really hard to read when your reviews are so long. I have a lot to say, okay? I know you do. Don't worry, your internet followers will be able to see your monologues. Just start with this. If the review is longer than 2 lines, truncate it. Trust me, your table is going to be much better. Are you trying to get me to write JavaScript? I'm pretty sure you have to measure out the size of the browser and the text to do that. Nimon shrugs. Sounds like a you problem. Marcy pouts for a bit. I wonder if Tailwind could help me out. It takes a bit for her to find what she's looking for, but the keyword truncate leads her to line clamp, utilities for clamping text to a specific number of lines. That's exactly what she needs. So she updates her function component used to display the review and takes out the existing classes and replaces it with line clamp 2. Wow, that was easy. Tailwind, you are just full of little gems and surprises, aren't you? Now, for the status and date read badges, as a reminder, the cell data function component takes an inner block as a slot. So Marcy can write another new function that will style the badges and display it as an inner block. This is trickier CSS implementation. So Marcy decides to go and use Tailwind Play to mess with it outside of the context of her app. Tailwind Play is an advanced online playground for Tailwind CSS, and includes support for things like code completion with instant preview, and this makes prototyping new ideas a lot easier. Once Marcy moves the badge from Tailwind Play to her LiveView module, she makes some final tweaks and updates her code to use Nemone's custom colors, and is successfully rendering the status and date red for completed books. She opts to write 2 versions of the function using pattern matching on the status. Even though it doesn't follow her rule of 3, she does decide to extract shared classes and HTML structure because of the complexity of the badge itself. The second function takes care of the in progress and want to read books. There are 3 background colors corresponding to the 3 different statuses, and for her in progress and want to read, she wants to generate the color dynamically in her function. At first, she's tempted to interpolate just the color with the utility class string. But Tailwind extracts classes in such a way that if it will only find classes that exist as complete strings in your source code. So if you use string interpolation or concatenation, Tailwind will not find them and not generate the corresponding CSS. Knowing this, Marcy makes sure that the dynamic function returns the complete background color utility, so in this case, BG silver or copper. With that final touch, Marcy excitedly shows it to Moan. Excellent, well done. Ready for the final phase? Yes, I want to make sure everyone can read my full reviews. Ask and you shall receive. Marcy squeals in excitement. Ooh, I can write so much more in my reviews now. And I can even show off the cover art that I have stored. I do remember seeing a modal in core components. I wonder if I can use that. This function has a very helpful example for how to implement it. And to get started, it just needs an ID, and Marcy adds it to her HTML immediately following the table. In order to get it to render, Marcy uses a function that also comes from core components called showModal. And to invoke it, you add a phx click event to a button that she wraps around the review component. And this requires an ID to pass to it so that it knows which modal to show. As part of the design, Nemone indicates a scale shift of the review text for when it is hovered and focused. In implementing this, Marcy notes that she's repeating the same utilities for focus and hover states. It would be really nice to clean this up and just have one modifier to represent both states. With a little reading of the Tailwind documentation, she stumbles across adding variants using plugins. And plugins are a way to add styles into your style sheet by writing JavaScript instead of CSS. In this case, Marcy needs to add a custom variant. So she implements the add variant helper function, passes the name of the modifier, which in this case is going to be Hocus, and an array of formatted strings that represent how the selector should be modified. Even though this is JavaScript, Marcy is okay with using it because the Tailwind documentation has some excellent examples and she can basically copy and paste it. This allows her to clean up her code with Hocus as a single modifier to represent both hover and focus states. At this point, Marcy can open the modal with all its default styling from core components, and it has her temporary content in it. Using what she has learned about Tailwind utilities, she goes about changing the classes so that the core components modal matches Nemone's design. As she's working through this, she really appreciates that the component is using focus wrap and has many accessibility attributes that she likely would have forgotten if she were writing this from scratch herself. With the modal styling updated, Marcy moves on to adding the content. Since the content of the modal is dynamic based on which book is selected, she decides to make a details struct that she can utilize that will have all the fields that the modal needs to display. She then adds a details assigned to mount and starts it out as an empty details struct. Now, this next challenge that she comes across is she needs a way to perform 2 actions when the button is clicked. 1, showing the modal, and 2, setting that details assigns. And she finds Phoenix LiveView.js, which is a module that provides commands for executing JavaScript utility operations on the client. So when a book is selected from the table, she uses js.push to send an event to the server called showDetails, and it has a value so she can identify which book was selected, and then she can pipe that into the same showModal function, so both of the events are triggered. An event handler uses the title params to get the book details and update the socket assigns. Once in the socket, she can use the details to fill out the modal content, add the correct HTML structure with the Tailwind utilities for styling. The Tailwind utilities are all straightforward, and she's pleased with the visual result. But she notices one issue. When she closes the modal and goes to open another book, there's sometimes a lag in the server where the modal comes up and it still has the contents of the previous book that was selected. So she decides that she needs a way to set the details to empty again when the modal is closed. The modal function comes with an optional onCancel adder, which takes a Phoenix LiveView.js struct. So she updates her modal call to include this with a JS push hide details call. And then she can set up another event handler and set that detail assigns to empty. And now, with her modal working smoothly, and she has a big sigh of relief, feeling very proud of herself. And she goes to show Nimon. Marcy, nice job. You took on every challenge I gave you and produced something really elegant. What did you think of the process? This was really cool. I like how well Tailwind CSS pairs with Phoenix LiveView, and the Phoenix developers put a lot of effort into the pairing to make it so much easier to pick up and implement. I learned a lot about Tailwind, and the documentation is incredibly user-friendly. Tailwind makes it very easy to apply classes conditionally with lots of modifiers. You can use arbitrary values for one-off custom styling. For more broad sweeping changes, you can extend or overwrite your theme. And it has lots of gems like line clamping, which makes the developer job easier. And with custom plugins, you can add so much more specificity around designs. Pairing this with LiveView made it really simple to deal with a problem when Tailwind classes are being repeated too often. And with live filtering with PHX change, it makes it a lot snappier user experience when searching for bugs. I'm super grateful for all the core components and how easy it is to implement new features. And even when I had a stumbling block, I was able to use Phoenix LiveView.js to solve a lot of problems without writing any JavaScript myself. Congrats, Marcy. You sound like a regular front-end dev. Are you going to switch career tracks now? Ha, no thanks. At very least, I'll be comfortable helping out with front-end dev work at work. But mostly, I want to go home and read my book. Thank you for embarking on this LiveView and Tailwind journey.
Thank you, that was excellent. Do we have questions in the room? Okay, so we'll just have one question since we're past time already.
So thank you for the presentation, it was awesome. In your example, you're owning the components you're implementing, you have the code, right? How would you...
Oh, that might be me, sorry.
How would you implement a component you offer as a library with Tailwind?
A component with, sorry.
How would you implement a component that you design with Tailwind and offer it as a library for someone to use, because you cannot jump in the styling, right?
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure how I would do that like as an external source, but like if I have components within, so in this demo project, all the components were like locally made inside that file, but with the Phoenix setup, you can very easily extract those components into something like core components, or where I work, we have files that correspond to different areas of the app, and different teams will use those. And so within app, it's definitely really easy to make your components and extract them that way. I'm not sure how I would do that from an external library standpoint, though.
Okay, cool. Let's give one round of applause to Meks.